Hello, everybody out there in YouTube land, and welcome to DC Fans United. So today I am here with my friend Cale. He's got a YouTube channel called Cale Chip Flix. And how are you doing today, Cale?
I am doing very well on this extremely humid and annoyingly warm July evening.
Pretty humid where you are.
Yes. And on the East Coast, we are it is in the mountainous areas of the East Coast. It's very humid. The higher you get, and since we are closer to Baltimore, it is also extremely smelly. So
Oh,
that's
because of the pollution.
yeah, that's what I'm dealing with right now.
That's a
So
drag.
yeah, it's only during like peak heat too, when normally during spring and fall and stuff, you don't get that musty smell of industry and death from Baltimore.
No, that's brutal.
Yeah. So that's the only disadvantage of, I mean not the only disadvantage, but that's like the most main disadvantage of living close to Baltimore because
Well,
there's no
I'm glad I live out west then.
yeah, I mean that's its own can of worms, but no place is perfect.
That's for sure.
So,
So the reason I had you on is because you did your part one video criticism of the Watchmen movie.
mhm.
So you had a pretty negative view of the movie. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, with a caveat.
Okay, what's the caveat?
The caveat being is I think overall, even though it is a negative film experience from my perspective, I do believe that the film has merit in regards to the um, the superhero movie genre as a whole, and in a weird way, almost unintentionally satirizes comic book hero film movies, the same way the original graphic novel did for the comic book superhero genre.
That's
If that makes
interesting.
sense.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. It does it unintentionally, though. You
Yes,
think?
that's the main difference. The I think the '80s was a perfect time when that comic book came out, because you did have you know uh, things in the medium, where things started to take like a much darker, more gritty turn, more so than we'd really seen before, and that's when the medium was kind of starting to find like a like mainstream, not success so much as it is mainstream um, appraisal, with things or acceptance with comics like The Watchmen or The Dark Knight Returns, or wasn't the when was the Killing Joke released? Was that like the late '80s?
Yeah, I think around 86.
Yeah. So yeah, around that time you had like these, and I know it was mostly pioneered by Frank Miller and Alan Moore, but I feel like The Watchmen it did a great job at
Oh, sorry, it was 88 for the Killing Joke. I was
yeah,
thinking.
I thought it was a little bit later. But with The Watchmen, you had like the comic itself looked like a 1950s paperback. Like I remember when I first started reading it, I was much younger, and I thought, it's such a gritty story, but yet it has this kind of almost garish, like 50s appearance to it. And but as I read more into it, it kind of made sense because the whole comic was about these characters for the most part dwelling on their past, their glory days, and their inability to like reclaim that magic, for the most part. And
Well,
so
that's a big part of the movie, though, too, don't you think?
yes, but the difference in that is with the graphic novel, you had you had almost books dedicated to each character. Each character kind of had its own arc within a comic, and I feel with the movie, it had to condense and squeeze so much things in it that it didn't really have an overarching plot. It had almost three of them, and I think with the written word, that's a lot more forgivable because you can, I mean, the Watchmen, it's not like something you really can sit through. You can sit and read in one go through unless you're like really dedicated to it and really like powering through it.
Yeah, it's long for sure.
And I feel like with the Watchmen movie, so much things happen so quickly, and they move on to the next thing so quickly, and they have to like change it up between the characters to keep it interesting, that it almost like loses itself, almost like unintentionally. It loses itself within the bloated nature of the story. Now, where I think, like I said, with the comparison to the graphic novel to the 50s genre, I think in the 2000s is where like the superhero movie genre kind of started to find its place. Like you had the Bryan Singer X-Men films, at least the first two anyway, and then you had the first two Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films as well. And then once you saw companies saw how profitable those movies were, they kept trying to like experiment and see what formula worked and what brought in like the big bucks, the casual audiences, as well as like hardcore fans. And they struggled with that for a long time. And with Zack Snyder, I think the one thing that Zack Snyder is so good at is he's good at nailing a look. He's good at really nailing the look of something. And with 300, which was such a simple story that it really was just visual, like it was 90% visual. And he nailed that look. And since the story was simple, he didn't really have to like devote too much time to it. When you give him like such a Herculean task as condensing the Watchmen film, and into like a 2.5, 3 hour long movie, as well as keeping with certain tropes of film success at that time, what was successful in the genre, like it was almost, I mean, it was a near impossible task. And I feel that the flaws in the movie kind of encapsulate what the flaws were or the growing pains were in that entire decade, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that is a pretty apt comparison to comparing what the original comics were trying to say, comparing them to the comic, genre as a whole. The movie kind of did that with the superhero movie genre. And with that in mind, I think it would be really interesting to see if it were made like today.
Right. That's exactly. I think it was made almost 10 years too early, because we're at a point now where that's all that's making money right now. Whereas before, they were trying to find a way to be profitable back then. They were trying to find a way, okay, we hit some gold with The Dark Knight, with Iron Man, with Spider-Man, but there was a lot of crap like in between those tries. Like there were just as many failures. I mean, probably even more failures than successes. I remember in 2008, I think that summer they had like 12 comic book movies. Like they had Wanted, they had Hellboy
Fantastic
2.
Four, right?
Yeah, no, that was 2007. They had the original was in 2004, and then the Silver Surfer was in 2007. And they tried to make that one like kid friendly. It's kind of funny that I think the most successful kid friendly superhero movie in that decade wasn't even a. I mean, I think it was based on something loosely, but it wasn't a mainstream.
Incredibles?
No, I actually thought Sky High was like that.
I never saw that.
Yeah, it's a good little film. I mean, it's probably aged a little bit by this point, but it's like it's a very clever, and it's for it's a younger audience film. And I actually, with The Incredibles, it's weird because I have a weird relationship with that movie because um, as I got older, I've appreciated it more. But I remember when I first saw it, I was like 16 or 15, and I actually was really underwhelmed by it.
Really?
Uh,
Even when it was new?
even when it was new, because I think at that time, like I was more in like when I think of Pixar, like even though they had certain exciting elements, like what I thought Pixar did really well at the time was it told very human and very um, natural stories. And I thought The Incredibles was its most like spectacle laced film. Like it had a lot of action, it had a lot of excitement in it, and that by itself is fine. But I remember in the trailers they really hyped up this notion that it would be about the more like the family dynamic from like what happens when you retire as superheroes, not so much as them going back to it. And as I got older and rewatched the film and saw it for what it was, I appreciated it more. But I think like the way that they marketed it through trailers, I thought it was going to be something else. And as I've gotten older, actually, I've sympathized with the plot more. And I think another thing with the movie plots that are going on, I think that the plot of that film has become more relevant as well. Because you have the main villain in The Incredibles is somebody who wants to streamline and make superhero stuff casual.
He's
And
the toxic fanboy. I've seen that comparison. I don't know if I agree with that.
I don't even know if that's a apt comparison because I think that kind of minimizes it a little bit.
Have you seen that though?
Yeah,
this kind of a thing going around where they were saying he's like, "This is you. This is the bad fandom." I was like, I don't think so.
I mean, there is. I mean, you could see that character in so many different ways that I think, like, I've seen theories about him being a capitalist, like what's wrong with capitalism, him being what's wrong with not growing up or getting over something. Like he can be interpreted in so many ways. I kind of just saw him as, more like, not like the bitter could have been, which is like, in every kind of like it's a trope that's been around forever. Like the sympathetic villain that couldn't be what he wanted to be, kind of trope. Like I didn't look into it much more than that.
Yeah.
But but yeah, more of what I was thinking about the Watchmen in comparison to today. I think there was just so many things going on with the movie's production, and that's why like I'm kind of struggling making the second part, because there's so much more to it than initial critique, because there's so much that went into the production of that movie and so many false starts and stops. And
I saw it had a pretty big budget.
Yeah. They initially Terry Gilliam was supposed to do the movie, and he's done a few like fantastical kind of things, but it was kind of like that kind of like hard R, more thought-provoking superhero film was almost thought to be like unfilmable / like box office poison. Like, I mean, when Terry Gilliam was supposed to direct it, I think in like 98 or like the early 2000s, that's when Shyamalan's Unbreakable came out. And it was like a total failure at the time at the box office. Like nobody saw it.
Wow.
And they were like, no, we can't do it this way. Like nobody will want to watch it. And it's kind of funny because now in retrospect, people like view that as like Shyamalan's probably best film. Which is
it was funny. Downhill from there, I think. Although The Sixth Sense came after it, or before?
No, it came before it.
Yeah.
Well, that's also another problem. When Unbreakable came out, they marketed like a horror film. They marketed like he could feel people's pain and suffering, as like a horror trait, not really a superhero thing. And if you look at like old trailers of it, you can see where that came from. So
That's interesting. So,
yeah,
have you seen they're making a new one or a sequel or something?
yes.
Should be
And
out.
but here's the thing: I think they're also marketing this film wrong because they're making it look like your standard superhero, like assemble kind of movie, instead of making it. It's probably way more philosophical and thoughtful than that. Like Split and Unbreakable aren't those kind of films at all. Like they're not kind of like an action packed like thriller kind of thing. They're very introspective films. Like yeah, there's suspense in them and action in them, but it's a very small part of those movies. Like it was almost weird when I saw that trailer because the end of Split was so eerie and creepy, and you kind of like you didn't almost know what to think. And then in the trailer, it was almost like they made his like form like a oh shit moment, like a crowd moment, if that makes sense. Like they
Yeah,
made it kind of like teased it the whole time in Split, and now in the trailer, if you haven't seen Split, it kind of like ruins it. It ruins that entire movie.
oh wow. So, going back to the Watchmen, though,
Mm-hmm.
do you think, it's obviously a really hard movie to make?
Mm-hmm.
Like Lord of the Rings, for the longest time, it was thought that couldn't be done as a movie.
Right.
So, in your opinion, do you think The Watchmen could be done better than Zack Snyder did it, or that's about the best you can do?
No. In actuality, I believe that it as a movie, if they want to do it maybe as a trilogy, it could work. But I don't think it lends itself to that. But I mean I know that they've tried to do this for decades too, is that it would work way better as a mini series, because then you can devote each of these individual maybe like hour long specials to each character, and then like have everything all culminate in like you know like either a 3-part like finale of a mini series. Like I just think that there's too much stuff going on that you could condense it into a 3-hour film, even a 4-hour film. Like there's just too much there, and there's too much important stuff to just regulate to one film, in my opinion.
Sure. Okay. Okay. So it's just an insurmountable task. I guess
Right.
they are going to be doing a miniseries on HBO, right?
Yeah, but even now it's kind of it's in developmental hell, and I mean I've tried to find more research as to why it's in developmental hell, but it seems to me that there are a lot of people that are trying to like recreate it. It seems because of the backlash and because of how underwhelming the performance of the film did, that's why they're so reluctant to take it on. So in a weird way, them finally doing this insurmountable task and creating a movie version of it is ultimately to their detriment, because now they're having a hard time keeping people on board because they saw how underwhelming the initial film uh, um, was, how it performed, and
Yeah.
also it is very split down the middle. Like people either absolutely love it or they absolutely hate it. There's not like there's not a fine line. So not only are you trying to like be loyal to the source material still, and you have to teeter on that. Okay, what do we change to make it more streamlined if we could, and but at the same time, how do we not make it as polarizing as it was before? So it's almost like they made the job even harder for themselves by actually doing a decent enough job with a film, like an actual like. My flaws from the film are strictly from I think I think the industry or the production the studio's intervention, I would say is
Exactly.
90%. Yeah, I would
Well,
say
see,
is.
that's bringing that up though. Studio intervention.
Mhm.
Can you imagine though? I mean, we're talking about it if it were made today. Now that I think about it, it might actually be worse because can you imagine a 2-hour version of the Watchmen? You know,
Right.
the studio mandates are what cut down Justice League to a skeleton. So, boy, a 90-minute Watchmen,
Right.
scary.
It's almost like you'd have to make another, like, you know, it's almost like you'd have to make individual films for each Watchmen character. And then that would probably turn into a mess in and of itself, because that was the very point that Watchmen was trying to get away from, the actual comic. Like, you just have like 5 movies of just depressed middle-aged superheroes walking around, essentially. Like, that'd be like the anti-Avengers, and they would never do that. But I think, but
That's a little bit the way the source material is, though.
right. But
A lot like
that's
a lot
kind of,
of your criticism of the movie. It seems like that's the same way in the comic. Maybe it's just not translated well, or why?
well,
I
I
don't
think that's in
understand.
general. I think in general that's why the movies themselves struggle, because if you read DC, DC is a lot more deep. Like, there's a lot more character depth in my opinion, in characters like Batman, and characters
Yeah,
like Superman, and each character in the Watchmen, as opposed to Marvel, where you could like sum up these characters in like a sentence. Like, if you needed to, with each character in the Marvel universe, it can be as complex as one sentence. Like, you don't really have to like go deep in explaining these characters' backstories or why they are that they are. Like, I mean, you can, but essentially you can just say Tony Stark, rich billionaire in a metal suit. Thor, god of thunder. Hulk gets angry, turns into green guy. Like, you can't just, with a lot of the DC characters, like, you could say Superman, he flies around and picks things up, but it's almost like that's not what you read Superman for. There's like different reasons why you are invested in these characters. And that's why I think when you actually ask people about their favorite superheroes, a lot of the characters that they say are usually DC characters and not Marvel. It's kind of funny that probably, for depth purposes, the most deep Marvel character is probably Spider-Man, and they absolutely cannot get him right on film. Like,
yeah. Spider-Man's
they keep
been
fucking him
through a
up.
lot.
Mm-hmm. And I think
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about Spider-Man, but I thought the Tobey Maguire movie was pretty good, the first one.
right. But at the same time, they made
Is that
creative.
not good?
Well, it is, but at the same time, they made so many creative differences. Like, they made him Spider-Man right as he was leaving high school, and they all like they just generally made people older in that movie to get to make it more, I guess, digestible. Like, they didn't have to go too much into like his teenage angst or pop culture at the time.
Yeah. But man, imagine how badly it would have aged if they'd gone that way.
That's
You
that's
know?
why that's why they struggle to make it, because that's what they try to do with Andrew Garfield Spider-Man films, and even now they've already aged terribly. Like
Yeah.
him, like the kind of him with a skateboard. Like, I mean, even that was kind of aged when they did it. Um, and so I think their problem is they want to create this cinematic universe with all these characters, but at the same time, but it's almost like they're not doing it from a genuine, let's build these characters, let's really look into
Right.
them. They're
Well,
doing it.
they wouldn't be doing everything backwards if they were really concerned about the characters. I mean,
Right.
they start off with basically Batman versus Superman. Like, okay, there's Man of Steel, that I know, but that wasn't planned to be the beginning of the universe. That's just what they had when they started.
Right.
So it's like you start with Batman v Superman, and now we're starting to get all these movies that people are more hyped for. Like Wonder Woman did good, Shazam and Aquaman. You know, the standalone movies. They should have done those first. I mean, they had the blueprint directly from Marvel. You know, they did Iron Man, then they did Captain America, then they did Thor, and then they did the Avengers. You know, imagine if DC had done that. They did, okay, Man of Steel, we got out Superman. Maybe not even do a Batman movie right away. Like, Wonder Woman, and then, you know, Aquaman, Shazam. You know, we could have had Shazam in some of these movies. So, I don't know.
Well,
personally, I feel like they did it all backwards, no doubt.
Well, also, like, to say, you know, what you said about not doing a standalone Batman film, I feel like that was one of the biggest weaknesses of Batman versus Superman. It was almost like a half-assed Batman movie within a Superman film. Like, because we didn't have that initial background of him, they had to create their own vision of Batman while also creating another Superman movie. And I feel like,
if they were gonna do Batman versus Superman, that should have been in like 2021 or something. You know, there should have been all these standalone movies, including a Batman movie. I'm just saying, don't do that in the first like 3 or 4. We all know who Batman is,
right?
You know,
or
even
you release it a little bit too soon.
Suicide Squad movie.
I feel like, and here's the thing: a lot of people have a problem with the way Batman is portrayed in Batman versus Superman, but it's not so much that I had a problem with how he was portrayed, like how he was a little bit more on the ruthless side. It's just that I would want more backstory behind it. I would like to see how he became as vicious. I mean, it's hinted at, but you don't really explore that side of him. Like, I would love to see this slow descent of a normal Batman to like how not crazy, but how like kind of darker and more brooding he is in BVS. Like, that could be something that's explored instead of throwing you right in the thralls in it and it being kind of jarring to people who kind of know the Batman character.
Right, you know,
and then they
want
switch
your
him all
characters
around
to be different.
And then they totally changed his personality in Justice League, which, you know, which kind of throws you off as well, because he goes from kind of
not only did they change his personality, they like changed his world view and his philosophy and everything. And he was like, I was wrong. I did the wrong thing. I just killed you, and I wish I hadn't. It's like, why did you guys even make Batman v Superman? You know, Justice League was basically just a big eraser, and they're trying to erase as much of BVS as they could without totally destroying the DCEU, which, you know, I would say would be a lost cause, except these new movies, and I think we're going to talk about trailers, actually look really good. And I don't completely hate the early movies. I just wish they'd done them a little differently and maybe ordered them differently and explained the motivations.
I also think, now, I've rewatched Man of Steel a few times, and I actually believe that, like, I still think technically that's the best one that they've cut. Well, maybe Wonder Woman too. Like, Wonder Woman and Man of Steel are easily the best films in the DCU. But sure. I think the issue with Man of Steel is that it is a little bit overly long. It's a little overly long. The product placement was really jarring. like I love the fact that it actually gave us like Superman with action sequences in it. But it was so distracting when they like got thrown into a Sears and it like showed like the Sears sign for like 5 seconds as he's being thrown in, or he just happens to perfectly land into a U-Haul that has, but the U-Haul signage is perfectly there.
And his best friend just happens to work at IHOP. So they can talk about IHOP for like 20 minutes, and Lois can go to IHOP and be like, I'm at IHOP. Is the manager of the IHOP here? Oh man, those pancakes look good. Oh, by the way, and it's just like,
Right.
for real.
And I also think that they, and I think we'll talk about this with Watchmen too, is that I don't think Zack Snyder, for the most part, understands casting. I don't think he's particularly good. Like, I think he's so good at nailing a look, but at the same time,
Really?
yeah, because I do think Ben Affleck
Like
was great as
Rorschach.
Batman, but I do
Rorschach's
believe.
perfect.
Well,
It's like the
here's
best
here's
cat.
the thing. I think he looks perfect, but when I read the comic, I think they got it wrong. And the reason why I say they got it wrong is for a very specific reason. Is he, in my opinion, Rorschach is kind of, I think he's the good interpretation of almost like the fan that took things too far. Like, he's not this intimidating figure by appearance. He's kind of like a nerdy ginger that was bullied growing up and who had like a shit life, and they kind of like, and that world kind of mutated him into what he is. And I felt like they almost, one, they made his voice a little bit too deep, or maybe like not when he had like the Rorschach, when he had the Rorschach mask on, but like that whole reveal of him being this kind of like weak, small individual behind the mask. I thought that by making him a little bit too badass in the film, like made it like lessen that a little bit. Like he wasn't. They made him a little bit too powerful in the movie, or too scary. Like but I mean, he was supposed to be scary, but like in the wrong way. Like he was more Batman-ish than I would say he should have been. Like I feel like he should have been a little bit more. They should have explored his psychoses a little bit more. Um, like it could have been more varied than just essentially Batman, if that makes sense.
I guess it's tough. I mean, I could see how he would seem like the poor man's Batman,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know. I think they kept him about as close to the comics as you could, and like your one of your other qualms is the movie's runtime's pretty long.
Mm-hmm.
So it seemed like in the little flashbacks and stuff, you get, you see Rorschach when he's a kid, and his mom's a prostitute, and the other kids are bullying him, and he freaks out and beats them up. And I don't know. I, I thought they did about as good a job as you could, but
I
that's just
also
my
think,
take on it.
but that's another thing why I think the format of how they did it didn't work, because by the time you do see um those flashbacks with Rorschach growing up, you've seen so many of them at that point that you like they've kind of lost um
From other characters.
yeah, they've kind of like lost their luster a little bit, where you've gone back in time so much, and you've seen so many like characters pasts and why they are the way that they are, that it kind of loses impact, or not so much loses impact, but when it did happen to Rorschach, it was kind of almost like in this cog that was turning. Like you didn't really get a build up to why he is the way that he is. You kind of just, he's arrested and then you're just kind of shown it. Like you're not really, I mean, it's almost like they picked the wrong time in the time frame in the movie to like show his backstory. I feel like they could have
They've
maybe like,
done it done it earlier, maybe.
yeah, or hinted at it a little bit, because when it happens, you're not surprised, or that shock factor of him like killing that guy and his two dogs, like because they had already established him being violent like that. Like whereas in the comic, I don't really think he had done or had shown physical prowess. Like I know that he had like
Oh
used,
man, in the comic when he does that, it is shocking. Like I
right.
remember like what I was doing, where I was sitting when I read that, and
Mhm.
I was like, "Oh my God, this guy killed a little girl and like disposed of her body." And Rorschach shows up and kills the dogs
Mhm.
and throws them through the window, burns the house down, and kills the guy. It's like, oh man, never
Right.
forget that.
Which is why like them doing, like for example, when he jumps out of the building and he like manages to fight off like six cops before he's brought down, or him like
I thought that was a cool fight, though.
well,
Don't you
that's the
think? It
thing.
wasn't
It's
like,
cool, but at the same, but it lessens that impact of him actually showing himself to be vicious. Like you didn't really like he was kind of way more in the shadows in the comic. Like he was still himself, but he
yeah,
wasn't as intimidating or as physically gifted. Like for example, when he like shoots the in the first part of the comic when he shoots his little grappling hook. Um, in the comic, he's seen sitting, like he's in the window sitting down. Like he's not, he doesn't do like this wild like jump where he like balances his two like tippy toes on the window and then jumps down, or like he's not shown to have like as much of a physical prowess. And so when he's very much more stealth oriented in the comic. And so when you see like that gratuitous and shocking violent sequence of his past, it's a little bit more surprising. And then like right after that you see him like throw the grease on the other inmate. And so that's when you see like that's when you see his true nature for like the first real time. Whereas before in the movie, in regards to like style, kind of like to make it like actiony and stylish, they did make him look, they did make him more of a physical specimen. And I feel like that lessened the impact of when you saw like his true nature.
sometimes too, people get like really strong when they're crazy. You know what I mean? Like they aren't extra strong, but it's like they just don't care if they injure themselves. And like he so didn't want his mask to be taken off. Like
Right.
I really bought that scene where he fought the cops, and man, yeah, the actor too I thought was good because he had so much emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And what else? Oh, and the choreography of it was pretty good. Like, man, when I watch fight scenes, sometimes there'll be like 10 million edits. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like they show the guy and they show the other guy back and forth. Like, it seemed like a lot of the fighting, and I could be wrong on this, but it seemed like they didn't chop it up as much. Is that right?
The only time that they did, and I would agree that from a pure like spectacle standpoint, a lot of the action they did extremely well. The only time it got a little bit too Zack Snyder silly was when they fought Ozymandias, because they started like taking like punches and bumps that would literally kill them. Like normally, like before there was some groundedness to the action sequences, but then like you have Ozymandias pretty much like jumping 20 feet in the air and him like kicking Rorschach so hard that he literally flies across the room and smashes his head into like concrete bricks and stuff. And it kind of got a little bit silly at that point.
But he was throwing the comedian around at the beginning, right?
Yeah, but the comedian was like, one, he was like 300-pound like tank, and he was like getting like fucked up too. Like he was getting like injured really badly. Like it wasn't just and I did think it was a little bit silly that he was able to lift him up so high. Like in the comic, he kind of did it a little bit less gratuitously. Like there was like the whole scene wasn't like an action sequence. It was kind of like he beat him up for a little while and then tossed him out. But then again, since it's a movie,
Yeah.
you have to make it entertaining. You have to pad things out a little bit to make it exciting, which is why I would feel a miniseries approach. Like you can kind of step back a little bit from it.
Yeah, looking back, I'm actually looking at the comic now, and that fight between the comedian and Ozymandias is real interesting because it's like every other panel is the fight, and it's
Mm-hmm.
showing something else going on. It's the police that came to investigate it later.
Mm-hmm.
And so it shows like the comedian knocked on the ground, the comedian being picked up, and then it shows him thrown through the window, but it doesn't show like the part where he's flying or being like, the motion of it. So I don't know.
Yeah, and that's
I get what you're saying, and like when Rorschach comes through the window, yeah, he is actually sitting. I thought he was going to be crouched, but like kind of like a Batman kind of thing. But no, you're right, he was sitting. I guess there's a lot of real little like subtle things, but I don't
mhm.
know. I don't know. It's hard for me because I love the movie and I love the book. So maybe do you think? Oh, actually, I got a question from the chat. If that's cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so he wanted to ask you a question, and then we'll get back to what I wanted to ask you.
Okay,
So
yeah, go
let's
ahead.
see. He says, and this is Miller #1, says, it sounds to me like he thinks Rorschach is much less heroic and powerful than the movie portrayed. What does he think the meaning slash ideological component of that lesser wait, what does he think the meaning slash ideological component of that lesser quality from the comics is, since Rorschach is more often seen as part of Ditko's question slash Mr. A, so a more objective libertarian viewpoint, and more hated that?
Hmm.
So,
I would
okay.
actually say he wasn't even libertarian. He was way more hyper conservative. Um, actually, like I mean, it's even shown in both the film and it's more elaborated on the comic that he is very much a conservative. Like he even goes to like conservative pundits and conservative, propaganda. That's where that the Frontier or whatever the name of that newspaper company
Well,
that he gets his stuff
libertarian is
from.
definitely, I mean, seen as a right leaning opinion,
Yeah,
right?
but
So,
I think he um, I think with libertarianism there seems to be a little bit more afforded freedoms, whereas with extreme
right.
conservative views, it's
Rorschach isn't down with gay marriage. He's not down
right.
with smoking, drugs.
Mhm.
Like, yeah,
It's almost like he's like that. It's almost like the brutality of Batman fused with like a warped ideology of Superman. Like it's almost like he has such extreme purism views, but at the same time, he is like his lack of human understanding, um, or I think he is justice and it's pure black and white form. Like it's like he has no. I mean, the ending kind of sums that up. Is that he can't have like that compromise. He can't have that gray area, where I do think libertarianism kind of dwells in that kind of gray area, whereas that extreme justice, like I mean we see it today with like the border stuff, is that there is like that extreme side when the law is like black and white, and that's where a lot of them side with the people that are for it side. They just say it's the law, and that's that kind of that black and white viewpoint. And I feel like Rorschach embodied that more, and I think in the comic it is more shown to be a negative outlook.
yeah. Well, Alan Moore in real life is very liberal, from what I understand. So
Yes.
that makes sense. Like Rorschach wasn't meant to be portrayed as the hero, even though I think he does a lot of heroic things. It,
Mhm.
is that right? I mean, would you agree with that?
I would say he represents a viewpoint very
Yeah.
clearly. Um, and it's not like, I mean, he doesn't really show a humane side to him necessarily, but he's almost like, did you ever see No Country for Old Men?
I did actually.
He's kind of like an Anton Chigurh type character, where even though
Oh,
he's violent and very black and white, there is a sort of code that he works by, and he never compromises from that code. And I guess there's something admirable about sticking to like one way without compromise, and that's kind of how he ends by saying that kind of refusing to compromise. Like he would not, either he wanted to live by his word of, you know, no compromise, or he didn't want to live in a world of compromise.
yeah.
So,
That's part of why he won't stop being a vigilante
mhm.
either when everyone else did.
so,
He won't compromise on that.
and that's if there is one thing I thought that the movie did better. It's so weird because I'm conflicted on two ways, because when he dies in the comic, it's almost like the rest of everybody else has moved on, and in a weird way, that's like a more poetic death for him because like his supposed best friend was off like fucking Silk Spectre in like some part of Ozymandias's mansion somewhere, and it was almost like everyone had kind of forgotten him and moved on, and that was kind
Yeah.
of like the great tragedy of Rorschach. Is
It
that
was much more dramatic in the movie.
right? And I do think they with some scenes they tried to show his relationship with Night Owl, but I think you know they could like I just feel like a scene or two more of them having like some backstory would have made that a little bit more impactful, because it did make me go like, wow, these two were close. Like he obviously cared about him, even though he like talked shit about him the whole movie. He clearly cared about him, and I wish there was a little bit more established as to why, like, no matter how many times like Rorschach fucked up, like he still wanted to like he still cared about him, and I wish that
Yeah.
was explored a little bit more. But that's the thing; it wasn't in the comic, and that's why Night Owl was off with Silk Spectre somewhere. And I also felt like by him not like by them making it more dramatic and emotional, I feel like that kind of hurt Dr. Manhattan's arc a little bit, because there is that scene in the comic where he finds them laying next to each other, and he kind of smiles
at the end. Yeah,
yeah, at the
we were just talking about that.
Yeah, and
isn't that such a cute? I mean, not cute, but isn't that such a cool scene? He's just like, humanity isn't all broken or something like.
Right,
You get so much just from his facial expression.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. Like, it shows that he is not unhuman. That it shows that he is still there, and it can have emotion. And I feel like that in itself, and the fact that he is blamed for this catastrophe, but he knows that, or not. No, in the movie, he's blamed for the catastrophe, and I feel like in a way that makes his exit feel kind of forced in the movie, whereas in the comic, it's meant to be an alien, and so he's leaving more on his own accord. Like, yeah. I feel like, and that kind of makes it a little bit more poetic. Whereas in the movie, it makes sense from a movie standpoint, and probably from
it's
budget
poetry.
Standpoint.
It's like poetry. It rhymes.
Yeah, and I think, like in the comic, Lucas. That's another thing like you said with Rorschach and killing like the dogs and stuff, it being so shocking, is when they actually drop that huge octopus creature. Like, it is so shocking, like it is so violent, it is so jarring seeing just like
page after page of dead bodies and blood everywhere, and you're like, oh my god.
And I feel like from a budget standpoint is another reason why they decided to go with a nuclear explosion kind of looking thing, because who knows like how much money that, or how much computer imagery and work that would have to be done to like make that effective, and how much more scenes they'd have to show to explain it as well.
It kind of made more sense too. It was just a better ending,
right? Well, it's from a film standpoint, absolutely, it was a better ending. But I do feel like with the comic, it was more poetic, if that makes sense. Like, it had more, it was more depth.
It makes more sense though for multiple. Is it in the movie where multiple cities get attacked? And in the comic, it's just New York, right?
Yeah.
So why would the Russians and everyone make peace because America got attacked? They'd be like, well, that's awesome, But if they all got attacked, then they'd actually unite. So I found that to be a better.
I slightly disagree, because I feel like because it was made to be an alien, it was supposed to mean an alien attack. That they say like, if New York gets attacked, then we could all be at risk. And it's also kind of like the world will only unite when something bigger than itself occurs, and that like is kind of like symbolizing that this supposed force from another world is now targeting us, and we would be and alone country-wise, we're powerless to stop it. So instead of, attacking each other, then we can unite to, see if that, because there's other bigger problems facing us. I feel like in the film it had to be multiple situations because Dr. Manhattan is strictly American. So if he attacked just America, then I think the Russians would see it more as like kind of like self-destruction. But if Dr. Manhattan attacks like multiple areas, then it's kind of like, holy shit, like this is our force that's bigger than us that we have to take care of. But I think from a dramatic standpoint, it definitely, like the movie ending definitely meant more. Except for, and I don't know if they did this. See, this is another issue I have with the film. I don't know if there were certain scenes that were done intentionally to satirize, like that whole weird ending where it's almost like too upbeat, where Silk Spectre and Night Owl are just chilling with her mom, and it kind of has like this sitcom-y music playing, and it's kind of like atypical happy ending. Like it was almost like in the novel, like it had this kind of ominous ending. It had this real sort of like because Night Owl didn't have that scene where he confronted Ozymandias, or like when they're all compromised and they're like, oh, that sounds good to me. Yeah, it's like they were all like in like total agreement of what Ozymandias did. So when you had like them going about their days in the next, like in the ending, it had like that kind of ominous, like willful ignorance on their part, on all their parts, that kind of made that entire that part where Rorschach's journal get found like all that more like appropriate. Whereas in the movie it seemed like it was like a tacked on, or it was tacked on, where
that was almost like an Easter egg at the end. It was like, oh, you read the comic, good for you. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I get what you're saying though.
And also like the prison sequence, I don't know if the prison sequence was supposed to be
which part of it,
like the whole, where the fight scene where Night Owl and Silk Spectre are fighting, like it had almost like the Matrix like sound effects and the music,
well that isn't even in the comic, is it?
No.
That particular scene where they fight all those prisoners, guys. Yeah.
And I don't know if that was trying to be like, trying to just showcase them like getting their mojo back or something, or like, and doing it.
But that's what putting out the fire is supposed to do, though, is them getting their mojo back, right?
Well, I thought that was like Night Owl getting his mojo back and kind of showing what he was meant to do. And then we could talk about that sex scene, but like that was.
I know it's your favorite part of the movie.
Because that's the thing I love in the comic. I thought that was almost beautiful. Like it was almost like super poetic. It had this great, like
it was earned.
Yeah, it was earned, and it also like you had like they hinted at this more in the comic that Night Owl in his prime was very much a womanizer, was very much sexually like dynamic, and like during the scene where he can't get it up, like that made that scene more powerful. And also in the books, he's a lot more chunky, he's a lot more chubby, he's a lot more like out of shape.
You see him walking around naked.
Yeah, and when he puts on the suit again, he looks ridiculous. Like he just looks like this big dude in a suit, in a costume. So when he like finally gets his mojo back and he's like fucking the shit out of her. Well, one, it's not graphic like it is in the movie, but it's also like it's like him getting himself. It's more about him getting his character back and his mojo back than it is about the titillation. And in the movie, it was almost like it was done like purely for laughs. Like it had like
I honestly felt that when they got to that part in the story, they were just like, "Oh, we got to do a love scene. That's what's in the comic. We got to do it. Can we skip it? No, we got to do it. Well, let's make it a joke."
Right, but it was also like much more graphic than it was in the comic. Like they had like it was subtle in the comic, whereas this one you're just like full on like softcore porn style.
They had their
And
R rating, and they were going to use it.
yeah, so it's kind of, so that, and I felt like that sex scene was like more than anything, like Night Owl's like almost like his arc. Like it was almost like it culminated what made him himself. And I feel like it kind of just, it did that scene dirty because, that whole, it just,
It deserved a better presentation.
yeah. And also in the comic, he acts totally different afterwards. In the movie, he kind of does that and goes back to being himself.
Yeah, his personality doesn't change so strongly, huh? Because
And
before that, before they had to get him back into being a
Mhm.
vigilante to begin with, right?
Right, because he was kind of, I mean, in the movie it was kind of that way, but and that's another reason I had a problem with like that alley scene, like that alley fight scene, because
With the
that
knot
was,
tops.
yeah, because in the comic, I mean, yeah, he defended himself, but he was still kind of, very like gooberish and kind of like he wasn't as dynamic. Like in the movie, they're both already like kicking ass and excited, and it looks like they're ready to fuck at the end of that. And
Yeah,
and in
I think I think maybe they were trying to show their like budding romance or whatever, the passion between them.
Mhm.
But that was definitely kind of an issue of power scaling too, where you're like, are these guys super powered? Because they'd kick a guy and he'd go flying like
Right.
20 feet or whatever. But again, I didn't mind that stuff so much. That fight was in the comic at least. Oh,
Yeah.
and we have a question for you too.
Yes.
So you said earlier that in the comic you could tell that Night Owl was a womanizer.
Mhm.
So I'm not remembering that too well either, and he was wondering about that. Where is that at in the book?
So in the scene when he is here, actually I have the book near me too. There's
Yeah,
a sequence, that atom bomb explosion sequence. It's actually not initially Silk Spectre he's with in that
when
sequence. It's
when they're
actually,
vaporized.
yeah, it's actually an entirely different woman.
Really?
Yeah. Let me see if I can find it. Because he, yeah, sorry, dead air bad. Yeah, if you, it's on, I think page 16 of book, chapter 7.
I'll
And it's
check
a
it out.
and it's a completely different woman, and this woman fuses in, and he's jacked, he's in shape, and then like, she rips off his skin, and he's like Night Owl, like buff ripped Night Owl. He like rips off the other woman's skin, and it becomes Silk Spectre, and he's like chubby and out of shape again. And then like, so it's a subtle thing. It's a subtle thing that it's not like they outright, give you explanation that he's like, a womanizer, or like that he had multiple partners, but it was a way of showcasing that he had clearly had sexual relations with other superhero women before her, and that was like his, like it showed that he had a more
Yeah.
masculine and dominant personality.
Huh. I
And
never
I thought,
noticed that.
well, and I think like if they did do that in the movie, it would have confused people more than anything. Because they're like, who's this random woman that they're showing? Um,
Okay. Well, the guy in the chat here says that that woman, the other woman, is Catwoman. It's Night Owl's Catwoman version.
really?
Because yeah, but he says JMS. What is that guy's name again? J. Michael Straczynski. Fortunately, I have him on my shelf. Wrote the backstory for that in the Night Owl miniseries called Before Watchmen. So that's supposed to be like a Catwoman.
Did he have a relationship with her? I mean, they're naked. I would assume that they did.
What was the question?
Did he have like an affair with her? Because I mean, I would assume so because like I mean they're both naked in it.
Yeah, I think that's the implication.
Right. So I mean, I guess maybe not.
Dragons.
Maybe a womanizer might be a stretch, but like he definitely had more of a sexual dynamism about him, like than
Yeah.
he did now. So,
Okay. You said that they had an affair. So that's pretty interesting. There's a lot of little details to these things.
mhm.
I never did get around to reading before Watchmen, but I loved a lot of the covers, especially the Jay Lee and Darwin Cook ones. Looked like it had a
Right.
lot of cool art.
Yeah, and I think the aesthetic of the comic, like I remember when the movie came out and people wanted them to completely redraw the comic and like the way that the
No,
movie was, and I was like, no, that would
don't
totally
do it.
kill the entire point.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, it is interesting in the newer comics. They don't try and do that. Like
mhm.
Doomsday Clock that's running now. It's drawn and colored really well, but it's done the way a conventional comic would. It's not in this old style.
Right, and I've heard that's almost to its detriment. Like it makes it stand out less.
I suppose. I think maybe the reasoning for it is that they brought the Watchmen into the DC universe, so the DC universe is, just looks different, and the Watchmen universe looks
Right.
different, which, makes sense. And you got the house style, you just got to roll with it. I don't know,
Mhm.
though. Some things about it are strange.
So, but yeah, that's the reason why I dislike the sex scene is because like there was initially a lot more to it. And if it's just is it just me or does it look like in that? I mean, this might be like weird to like pull up from just pure thought, but in the prison fight
Yeah.
scene, they literally look like they kicked the same Asian dude's ass like 8 times. Like
Oh, they
it's
should have hired more
right.
extras.
Well, it looked like the same Asian dude with long hair gets his ass kicked by like both Night Owl and Silk Spectre at least like 3 times. Like he should still be collecting royalty checks.
Might be. You can do that with stormtroopers, but it's because they're all wearing
Right.
masks.
Yeah, I can get into a whole other rant about why like that's another reason why the new Star Wars films are so stupid.
Well, we try to save Star Wars rants for the
I know,
second
I know.
hour.
Yeah, that's why I'm.
No, I'm just kidding. But there's something about Star Wars. It's just part of the nerddom, I think. Like,
Mhm.
I've had at least half my live streams at some point turn into talking about Star Wars. And it's just like, why? Why does this always happen?
Well, I think it's just because, like, when you really get down to, and this is the only point I'll make on it, is there are certain situations where your affinity for something, when when you really like pull back all the glitz and glamour of it, it really is at its core extremely simple, and in a way, kind of cliche in a way. And when you try to add to it, it really just exposes how simple of a story it really is and how difficult it can be to add complexity to that without losing that
Yeah,
simplicity.
that's why, for sure, exactly. But yeah, I mean, that's why it's hard to add to. But I think that's also why, at its core, it's so good. They probably should have just kept it with the original trilogy. You've got a nice little story about good versus evil, and it obviously is drawing from all kinds of hero tropes and stories. And George Lucas has come out and said a bunch of different stories and movies that influenced him. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, I don't know, its simplicity is part of what makes it so good. Now they're starting to get into like the gray areas of the Force. Like there's the light, the light side and the dark side, and then there's people like gray Jedi's, and I'm just like, I like, let's just have good versus evil. We'll have like Superman and fight Lex Luthor and just call it a day. Like this stuff doesn't always, like, Watchmen's great in its complexity. There's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a place for things like that, but not everything has to be that either.
Well, that's what I essentially, that's kind of in a weird sort of poetic sense, that's the conflict of when you have a story that's as complex as the Watchmen attempted to um, made as simplistic, or it put it into a form of film where it can be put in this 3 hour time frame that has, you know, all these overarching plots and all these deep um, subplots and characters. And when you try to cram that all in, even if it's done from the best of intentions and trying to be as loyal as possible, sometimes in that time frame you just can't do it. Like, it's just difficult. It's like, you know, when you take an exam, you know, that's why when you study for an exam, like, it's hard. Like, you don't know what's going to be on the test because, you know, you covered like 15 weeks of material and you're like, ah, shit, which one of this should I look at? You know, what's more important than the other?
Yeah, you have to narrow things down.
So, but yeah, I mean, I guess like I don't necessarily. My main problem with the Watchmen film is not necessarily that it's a bad film, so much as it is, it's almost like there's no way it couldn't have been. Like, the only problems I have that specifically relate to it as a film is that there are some creative inconsistencies throughout the film, and I do think there's some tone problems in it where I don't know if it is trying to be satirical sometimes, but then really serious sometimes, or really almost funny sometimes. Like, there's like this. It tries to evoke many emotions at once.
If you were to change a couple things about it, what would you change?
Um, well, my one of the most major things I would do is change the look of the film, because I do think, and this is
Really?
just strictly a time frame of it, is that I do think it went with it kind of looks like every late 2000s superhero movie from a color palette standpoint. Like, it's very dark, very blue, very orange. And so, like, it's almost like
It
they
looks
took
like
it.
a Zack Snyder movie.
Right. Yeah, it's very hued. And I know they would have never done this at that time, but if it had like that kind of parodic, like 50s look to it, then I feel like that would have been more loyal to the source material, and also would have made those action sequences and the violence in it more shocking, as if it did have a straight aesthetic of, you know, that kind of, like, if it looked like a 1960s like Adam West Batman show. I mean, like, not obviously higher budgeted and looked more pristine, but if it had like that look to it, that would have, because it's kind of funny, because even though it took place in the 80s, the comic took place in the 80s, it was very much a story that relied on the tropes of like those 50s paperbacks. And I feel like the movie itself and its appearance, even though it took place in the 80s, they really modernized it and made it look like, you know, a film from 2009. And I feel like that's like my biggest problem. And also the costume designs, like, they also, I think, made the costume designs look too cool.
What?
um
How can you make them too cool, though? Oh, you
because,
mean they need to look like crappier or lower budget, like homemade stuff, or what?
well, I think because that killed some momentum of the character, like some of the characters' personalities. Like with Night Owl, when he's overweight and everything, and he does put the owl suit back on, he looks ridiculous. Like, that's kind of the point, is that he kind of, you know, he's living in the past. It kind of shows on how he looks. Like, he's not some like six pack 30-year-old guy anymore. He's kind of this doughy dude who, you know, it made it, even though the costume, I personally thought his costume in the comic was fine, but they made him like, and they made it so cool in the movie that it kind of kills that. Like maybe if he had that
I like
costume.
I
Go
like
ahead.
his cape better in the comic. How it kind
Yeah,
of
because it looks like
makes
an
like a
owl.
yeah, it's like a perfect little cone kind of how it wraps
Mhm.
around him. It's kind of
And,
neat. I
and I
guess his
also
suit in the movie is kind of rubbery looking too.
Mhm. Well, and also with Silk Spectre, they in the comic her costume was way more feminine and youthful, which is why when she wears it again and she's like this woman in like her mid late 30s, it almost does look kind of weird that this middle-aged woman is putting on this costume that was like appropriate for her when she was like 16 through 18. Like it was like there was kind of like a bit of more self-awareness in the costume design of the comic, whereas in the film it did seem like there was a little bit of that marketing going on where they're like, no, we want to sell some merchandise, we got to make them cool, we gotta, and I think that they look cool. Like I thought Night Owl's costume looked cool, but I think a lot of like the personality of the comic was left behind in that need to like kind of market it a little bit. I thought Rorschach was fine, and another thing I
Yeah.
thought Ozymandias, even though his voice was perfect, I thought he was a real visual miscast.
Okay. Yeah, someone in the chat actually just said that
Oh,
Ozymandias was miscast. So you'd agree on that?
yeah, because he's supposed to look like I can't, I'm not, don't quote me on this, but I think Alan Moore's inspiration for him was Alexander the Great, which is why his costume was more almost gladiatorial, and he had like the kind of the Caesar cut, and he looked like the perfect male human, like very intimidating while being smart at the same time. Whereas in um, the movie, they went strictly intellectual, and he didn't have like that kind of masculinity. He kind of looked more insular, I guess. Like he just looked very kind of sheepish almost. Like he looked like a rodent, like a rat, like a schemer. Like he looked more like schemy than you know
How
androgynous, I guess.
about when he fights that assassin guy that he set up? He looked pretty cool
Here's the
there.
thing. I thought
No?
visually it looked way cooler, but
Yeah.
in the in the scheme of things, like it kind of made it look more staged. Like it was supposed to be this kind of like quick thing where he's like, "Holy shit! Like this guy's here," and like it in the comic, it happened like so fast. Like he grabbed something, hit him, and then tried to like it looked a little bit more stagey, I guess. And that scene where like he shoots off that woman's fingers, like I can't remember if that happens in the comic, but it looked really kind of phony and weird in the movie.
They remembered they had an R rating and put that part in.
Yeah. But that made the way that scene was framed and everything. I think now I'd already read the comic, so I already knew what was coming. But the way that it was filmed and choreographed, it
Oh
made it look.
wow. So in the comics, she actually gets shot like through the chest.
Mm.
It's actually kind of worse. She gets
Well,
shot, and
yeah,
you see it
that's
in two panels through her chest. Like that woman died. And then
so.
Ozzy picks that thing up and beats the guy down. Yeah, it's a pretty similar scene.
Yeah, but it was a little bit more like deliberate in the movie. It was way
Yeah,
more deliberate, and that
he's
kind of
way taller in the comic too, huh?
yeah. Isn't he like 6'6"? I think in
He's
the
way taller than the assailant.
well, that's
He
another
looks
thing
he
that the
looks
sex
older
scene
too.
that the sex scene was I had a problem with. It was in that scene where he fails to get it up. Weren't they in the movie? They're watching like a news report, right? And he's like having trouble like getting it up.
Yeah.
In the comic, um, Ozymandias is actually on the TV and he's like doing some gymnastics and stuff. And they're like, this guy is 6'5", 240 of muscle, and he's in his 40s, and he's swinging around. He's being agile, and that's like he's Night Owl's hearing that in his head, and that's like why it's harder for him to like sexually perform.
That's exactly what's in the comic,
right? So, and that's why he's that feeling of him like not being worthy and is a little bit more sympathetic. So. And also just Ozymandias in general, like he's he's more of a he's less of a schemer that he was portrayed in the movie, and he's more of kind of like the anti-Rorschach, where he sees everything intellectually instead of like justice. Like he sees everything within that for the greater good. Like he plays that he goes way deep into that gray area to calculate the best outcome. So whereas in the film he just seems like very much like a more of a schemer kind of, backstabber person. And he doesn't have like, and he fights them, but he dispatches of Rorschach and Night Owl like way faster and easier. So, and it's weird because there's one sequence,
the final boss,
Yeah, but if there's one sequence that I think doesn't work in either the comic or the film, is when he supposedly kills Dr. Manhattan. Like, with all of his research, I always thought it was weird that why would he not think that there was like tons of him all over the place, like with all of his like knowledge. Like, why would he assume that he could kill Dr. Manhattan?
Well,
like,
that's kind of a comic book trope, actually.
Yeah.
Super villains are always doing stuff like that. They think they're smarter than everyone, but they always fail in the end.
So
I mean, I'd give that a pass. That's kind of a comic book thing.
So,
like Lex Luthor and everyone,
And also, I thought, even though visually she fit, I thought Malin Ackerman just didn't get it. Like, she just didn't. I mean, heaven help her, she tried, but I just don't think she understood the material.
Like, she was the one that played Silk Spectre?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like, I think that in one, like, she looked way too old in the flashbacks. I don't know if that was like a makeup thing, but I was like, no, that is clearly a woman in her late 20s, early 30s playing a 15-year-old.
You expect them to hire two actresses to play one character? I'm just kidding.
No. Well, that's kind of, I guess it's...
They could have.
They could have.
Had Wonder Woman. They had like three Wonder... they had a little girl and then like a mid-range, like a teenager girl. And then they had the adult Wonder Woman in that movie. So that's the best way to do it, I think, is just hire several actresses.
Yeah, and it's funny because they also, and in doing so, they also didn't make the woman who, Dr. Manhattan left. Well, the makeup in that movie just wasn't that great. It's so weird. It seems like a lot of their like budget went to like special effects more so than. Like, it seems like the makeup designer got a raw deal on the budget end of the spectrum, because there was a lot of scenes where the makeup just looked really off. I feel like the comedian's scar like moved different places within the movie. Like, at some places it was more defined than others. And that's not even like a flashback where he didn't have the scar. Like, in the sequences where he has the scar, I swear it's like in 3 different places.
That's got to be a bit of a nitpick, though. I mean, who's going to notice?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just a minor thing, and also, the aging makeup that they use for Dr. Manhattan's wife is like very inconsistent.
Oh, right. Like, she doesn't even. Yeah, I know that. I did notice. I was like, nah, she didn't look too bad.
She was pretty hot. Like when she was like throwing the earrings at him, I'm like, That's still a nice choice piece of ass, Dr. Manhattan.
Should
She
have
ain't
stuck
old
with
yet.
her. Old Dr. Manhattan. He made
Yeah.
some bad life choices.
Well, that's why I think like the strongest part of that whole movie was his own, like his little miniature film in the middle there. Like, I like
Oh,
the music.
where he narrates for 20 minutes?
Yeah.
That
Well,
is
that's the
good.
thing. I feel like that's what made me go like, wow, I wish this was like a little mini series where like each episode dedicates it to a specific character. Um, Now the only, and it's weird because I remember when people initially complained about Dr. Manhattan, they wanted him to have like a deeper voice, but I thought his voice was perfect for the movie. Like I actually really liked his voice in the film. Like even like I will admit when I read it, just because of his presence, I thought he would have a deeper voice. But you know, I felt like he nailed that kind of like gentle giant kind of um, unimpressed,
Omnipresent.
yeah, omnipresent kind of ness. I think if he had like a big booming God voice, that would have come across pretty awkwardly from a film standpoint.
Yeah, it's almost like he was trying to talk softly around all these little humans,
Mm-hmm.
like trying to not, especially with Silk Spectre and stuff, it made sense that he would talk in such a subdued way.
I do believe though that they made him a little bit too jacked. Like in the comic book, he was built, but he wasn't like overly muscular. I feel like in the film they like really like made him like almost too chiseled to the fact of where it was like almost distracting. Like it was.
You couldn't focus. You're like, this
Well, here's the
guy.
thing. Like they really didn't like. People were like, "Oh, the penis." Oh, like the penis is like in like 3 shots in the entire film. Like it's hardly there, and it's hardly noticeable. Like yeah, it's a penis. Like in the comic, the penis is everywhere, but you don't really see
Yeah,
the penis. Um, so it's
it's there though.
it's
They
there.
had they put a penis warning on the Blu-ray on the box.
They
Contains
do.
no, no. I'm just kidding.
I mean, I would have. I wouldn't have doubted it, but um,
Being rated R, I think, is enough
and
warning.
tell me if this was a little bit of a distraction for you or not. I feel like in an attempt to make it more like periodical, they literally chose like the most stereotypical songs. Like,
Oh, yeah, I wanted to talk about that. I know you really didn't like that song in the beginning, the Bob Dylan song, because it's cliche, but sometimes it's cliche because it fits really well. And I'm kind of a sucker for historical stuff too, so
mhm.
when I first saw that scene, I was like, it is self-indulgent, I'll admit. It's like a 10-minute intro with a
Yeah.
really long Bob Dylan song, but it's pretty cool too, they're showing all the different Soviet, like when they show the Soviet leader and like, all of his cronies there, Fidel Castro and all that. There's all the little historical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It
But that's the
definitely did a
thing.
good thing. It did a good job of setting it up. I don't know.
But at the same time, I feel like that in itself is another reason why it kind of adds to the fact that the movie is a collection of good parts where it put together is where it kind of falls apart because there's so many like self-contained like good moments but they don't relate to other stuff. Like there's just it's just a little um like it's almost like a collage of good of the comics like best moments almost. Like that's one of the problems I had is that yeah, like you said, the open sequence, it has a great look, it has great music, it almost tells its own story, like it's its own self-contained little story. But then immediately afterwards, you have to jump right back into the movie and like okay, wait, where was I 10 minutes ago? So, and
Yeah,
more on the music part, um, like the two songs I primarily had the biggest problem is when
I can
Night Owl.
guess. I can guess one from the love scene, right?
Yes.
Because you hate that scene, so I knew. But it
Well,
is really
here's
on
the
the
thing.
nose too.
Here's
It's
the
like,
thing. if they would have done the scene differently, I feel like that song could have worked. Like it crescendoed as he came and they hit the button, and that was weird. But I feel
That
like
was weird.
if they had made it maybe a little bit, if they had made it that big booming Johnny Cash version and had made it more acoustic, more kind of I guess seductive, for lack of a better word. Like there's so many versions of that goddamn song. So that actually wasn't as much of the problem, but I had the problem when Night Owl and the Comedian like broke up that protest and it played Boogeyman. Like it was like, oh god, like yeah, I get it. Like come
I'm
on.
trying to remember the music in that scene.
It was like if you look at the lyrics, it's like I'm a boogeyman, I'm gonna do whatever I can. Like it was almost like Big Brother. It's a song about Big Brother watching you, essentially.
Yeah. All
And
the
then,
music was really on the nose, that's for
and
sure.
then all along the watchtower, like we're going to the big guy's tower. We're going like the Jimi Hendrix song when Night Owl and Rorschach near the end where they go to Ozymandias's palace. They play All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like the music's really on the nose. Maybe I just like that era of rock and roll.
Oh, I do. That's the thing. I feel like
it's good. It's good music, but yeah, it is almost cliche in how they chose the things. But again, it's like you got to sell tickets too. You know, you don't want to go for the indie crowd. We were talking about how it only made 100. I saw you in your video, right? It only made 100 million domestic.
mm-hmm.
What the heck, dude? On $130 million budget, that's bad.
Well, here the thing is, it opened pretty strongly. I think it made 60 million in its first week, and so many people did the casual audience for all those changes that they made. The biggest complaint was that casual audiences didn't get it. Like they were like, "What even was that about?" Like they didn't understand.
Really?
Because the most common problem that people that didn't know the source material had is that they felt like there was no overarching plot. Like there wasn't like the thing that that was constantly on your mind. Like they didn't know whether it was a murder mystery about the comedian or if it was about the Cold War. Like there's always in these kind of movies, there's that overarching threat. Like what is looming? And like for example, in 300, you had the Persians. In Spider-Man 3, you had the symbiote suit. You had like there's always that thing that's there, that omnipresent threat. And in the Watchmen, your attention is so divided into individualism that a lot of them got distracted. And it was kind of funny because I showed Karina the film when I complained about it, and I'm like, let me know if what you're seeing from this film. I mean, we stayed up and we watched it all, and it was the director's cut.
Had she read the comic beforehand?
Yeah, and she hadn't.
She hadn't, or she had?
No, she hadn't.
Okay, cool. Because that's what I'm curious about, is what people who hadn't read the comic first thought, because my opinion of it, now that I think about it, had to have been obviously greatly influenced by having read the comic first. So I didn't even really think about what an audience that didn't know the source material would do with that movie. So yeah, please continue.
Well, yeah, and she thought that, and Karina doesn't even follow like comic book movies or something in general. Like she likes, certain Marvel movies and that the kind of the like she's very casual with it. And so she liked certain parts of the film, and she said certain sequences and things worked, and she liked certain looks of the movie, but overall she felt like she got confused a lot as to why certain things were being shown. Like she was like, why is Dr. Manhattan, why are we getting like a backstory about Dr. Manhattan now? Like why is it so important now? Like they literally are telling us like there's this war, there's this Cold War about to happen, and all this, we're near like this doomsday clock and the world just lost Dr. Manhattan. Why now are they giving me his entire backstory? Like, I want to see what's going on in the world, like right now. Why is it immediately giving me this? Or like that whole funeral of the comedian. Like, I think I don't know if it's in not other versions, but in the director's cut version, that entire sequence is like almost an hour long. His funeral is almost like an hour long.
His funeral's an hour long?
Because it goes from, it has the rape sequence or whatever, and then it goes to Vietnam, and then it goes to
not just the funeral, his whole comedian
the whole comedian arc is an hour long.
Okay.
And then like, so Karina was then like, okay, so I'm guessing like the whole movie circling around like this mask killer or whatever. And then when it goes to the Cold War stuff, then they're like, wait, are we just forgetting about the comedian? And then she was like, and then Rorschach gets captured, and then it turns into like this love story. And so it's almost like she's like, the movie just pulls you around so much and you lose sight of what's supposed to be important at the time, because you're made to care about so many things, and none of the characters really have like a connection. Their connections to the main overarching like catalysts are so loose. Like, they're not all directly tied to one thing.
Yeah, I guess in the comic, I mean, it jumps around a lot too. It's not linear by any means, but the connective tissue is there where it's lacking in the movie. Is that your take?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Well, like in the comic, it's really disjointed too. It jumps from scene to scene like the movie does, and comics in general often do that. So it's just connected together better.
Yes.
Is that your take? Whereas the movie is lacking.
Also, because the Watchmen, it in itself, it was still technically a series. The graphic novel wasn't this one-shot thing.
Yeah, 12 issues, right?
Right. So, and each of those issues told its own. Even though there was this overarching plot, they were pretty much self-contained stories as well. Like, each one was a self-contained thing.
Yeah. And, the best comics are that way. I think you should be able to pick up number 5 or number 532 or whatever. Any issue should be able to stand alone. In my opinion.
I feel like the Watchmen like really relies on past. I mean, it does do that, but it also does rely on past tense insofar as like there are like certain plot developments and stuff that's why like it was so unique at the time. Like it told its own story, it told its own thing, but there was still that thing looming in the background. And I feel like in the comic book form, it's way easier to pull that off because you have time to reflect between issues. You have time to like gather your thoughts. Whereas with a movie, like you're really there for, it's got to keep your attention for an extended period of time and, get that full experience in one sitting. And I feel like in a weird way, I feel like it's closest, like kind of like it's spiritual, like what's it's like when it's mirrored, it's opposite, like it's Unholy Union film counterpart. That's the thing. Is kind of the Hobbit series, because that's like a film that did the complete opposite, had the complete opposite problem, is that The Hobbit as a book was very simple, very straightforward, very
quick. Man, 3 movies.
So then they tried to stretch it into like this 3-part series.
Movie ended and they hadn't gotten to Lake Town, I was just like, are you kidding me?
Right.
I was like, oh no.
Yeah, so
I don't know. That could have been 2 movies, easy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and the third movie, I mean, I like them all well enough. They're entertaining. I've watched them all a few times, but that third one is literally an entire movie of a battle. Like,
Mm-hmm. And it's not
why?
even like, I almost feel
Not
like
even
this,
that great. I mean,
right?
it's not Gettysburg. You know, I love that movie, Gettysburg. It's a movie just about a battle. But there's a lot going on. This is literally like CGI Army 1 smashing into CGI Army 2 until CGI Army 3 shows up.
Right. And I almost
Uh,
feel like the CGI was done even better in like the Two Towers or the Return of the King, even though that movie's like a
yeah.
decade older, because it flowed better, it had better pacing, it had, you know, it was more steeped in, but I mean that's a whole different rant. I mean the original point is just the Watchmen movie tried to condense this large, complex, and near intentionally convoluted story into this small 3-hour frame, whereas, you know, the Hobbit tried to stretch this simple, I guess at most 5-hour read into like this whole like 13-12 hour epic. So, and it's
Yeah.
kind of funny how like
They had to add a lot.
so it's you know, it's kind of like the lesser of two evils, where, you know, where sacrifice had to be made in the film version of the Watchmen. um and I think they chose the right sequences to show in the film. I don't think that, you know, like for example, when I watched the huge deluxe version of the film where it had the black
Pirate.
sail, yeah, it really kind of was just distracting, honestly, like more so than anything. um Especially with the way it was animated. I mean, the thing about why it works so well in the comic is visually it looks like a 1920s paperback. Like it looked like they even went even more meta and, you know, made a classic comic within another comic that was trying to look like another type of classic comic. Like there's so much
And
complex.
it was jarring too how dark it was. That pirate comic. The
Right,
guy's like got a raft of corpses, right? And he's paddling
right.
along and he's dying of thirst and everything. I was like, this boy needs to read some happier comics. You know?
Right. Well, that's kind of in the comic itself, it just flowed better. It tied into what was going on in the Watchmen story so much better and seamlessly than in the Watchmen movie, because it was
Ultimate
clearly
cut.
it looked like a dark version of a Justice League animated cartoon. Like it didn't
Really?
really, it didn't have like that visual jarringness of like an old like paperback.
Because I've
So
just watched the director's cut.
hmm.
I haven't watched the Ultimate.
So but yeah, I mean, the other thing you wanted to, were there any other points about the Watchmen you wanted to cover?
I think that was your main criticisms, right?
Yeah, just some bad
Was
casting, some visual choices, and ultimately, I think for the tools that he was given and for the task that he was charged with, I think Zack Snyder literally did as good as anyone could have done. I don't think any other director, for what they needed to do, could have done it better than him. Aside from like some casting choices and some like certain sequences, but I think no matter who did it, it would have had the same problems no matter what, strictly because it was supposed to be a self-contained movie that had the entire story in it. Like it's just too much to ask from anybody. So I think
okay.
if they do eventually get a mini series out there, I would really love to see how it goes. But I think ultimately, like, because after I made like that part 1 video, I just reread the entire comic, um, and I got so much. You know, even now, like I think this is the 4th time I read the comic from cover to cover, and I've seen the movie like 10 times. and I still got so much more out of the comic. Like I thought about it. I thought about it like for 2 days straight after I got done reading it, and just like just how like you said, these little tiny details, like they stay with you. And it's so weird that Alan Moore has like
Yeah.
such a grasp on the human psyche, and it's not even from that standpoint of understanding the character's psyche. It's almost like he understands the reader's psyche and how like he knows that the reader is going to be feeling at certain specific points, and this is why he chooses for this scene to happen next. And he's like, he just looks batshit insane.
Yeah, he looks like a wizard who's been lost in the forest for like a year or two, you know. And when you listen to him talk at, you know, conventions or whatever, well, he doesn't do conventions, but when you look at the interviews of him, he seems pretty crazy too. Like he'll start talking about magic and stuff, but he did write some amazing things. So, you know, he's creative. No doubt about that. But I had we had a question in the chat here I need to ask you. Oh yeah, because we're talking about more anyway, so that works. So we were talking about Silk Spectre in the movie. So would you say, you know, is it the actress's fault, or what Miller #1 asks is Moore's writing of Silk Spectre was pretty bad in the book. So, you know, do you think she was just, you know, bad source material, or do you think it was the actress or the writer on the movie, or what do you think?
Well, I think when I reread the Watchmen comic again, I kind of saw her as a character that wasn't ever allowed to grow up in a way. Like she's always been taken care of by either her mother or a romantic interest, or like she's never been able to stand on her own. And that's why I think like she's still like her outfit, she in the comic, she still looks like an adolescent, even though, you know, she's a woman in her 30s. And I think they kind of wrote her kind of bratty and kind of like kind of bitchy. And I think that where the mistranslation or came in the film came from is I think they tried to interpret her as kind of this powerful yet like I think it was kind of a combination of Zack Snyder's interpretation of the character, and also I think as far as Malin Ackerman, I think her delivery in key scenes like did not like come out the right way. Like when she finds out the comedian is her father, like I didn't get like this kind of like in the comic it's written kind of like she always knew, but she had buried it and she didn't want to realize it, and she didn't want to like face it, but she had known for a while. In the movie, she played it as kind of like, how could this possibly have happened? How could this possibly? I mean, throughout the entire comic, it's hinted at that it was her father. Like they showed the sequence of him saying, "Can a guy talk to his friend, his old friend's daughter, or whatever?" They played that. They showed that panel like at least I think they showed it like 3 or 4 times throughout the comic, and so it was almost like she kept fighting that
party.
I'm sorry.
That party where he's in a tuxedo and stuff. Yeah, and yeah, they keep cutting back to that.
And in the film, they do show that, but they only show the comedian saying that line once. And I guess because it's a little bit harder to translate that into film, where in text you can kind of read it. You can read it, but interpret it like many different ways. Like the first time you see him say it, it probably did just read like, "Can a guy talk to, you know, an old friend's daughter," or something, because you know, like maybe that showed that he still had feelings for the, you know, the original Silk Spectre, or Like you can interpret it differently when you're reading it, but when you actually see the line being delivered, you know, you can clearly be like, oh, he's talking like that's his daughter. So it's a little bit,
Yeah.
but back to the original point is that, you know, it's she played it like she was in utter shock and disbelief and anger, whereas in the comic, it was kind of like this, that she was fighting it and didn't want to realize the truth. And like I feel like that scene kind of lost a little bit of its emotional impact. And also like she just played it different. Like she was almost like she played it as a different character in different sequences. Like she at first, when she's like with Dr. Manhattan and Rorschach comes in, she's all like bitchy, kind of like, get away from my man, you're not welcome here, like kind of that person. But then when she's like with Night Owl, she's more of this like self-aware, self-pitying, like, oh my god, what am I doing? And it's not like inherently the dialogue, but so much as just the way that she chose to convey the dialogue at different sequences. Like if she went full on just bratty or self-deprecating, or like you had to be consistent, because I think Alan Moore just wrote her as somebody who's just immature. And
Okay.
yeah, I think
that seems to be a common criticism there, I hear.
And I mean, that's also kind of the context of it being a parody. Like she could be seen as, you know, the typical like female superhero, whereas in those old paperbacks, like the female superhero was essentially kind of like a sex object slash third wheel to the superhero and the villain, or even the superhero and his male sidekick. Like I feel like that there was a little bit of a parody there going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. That'd be definitely giving him more credit.
Is there any more questions on that?
No, it's probably pretty good on the Watchmen. I just want to point out too, for everyone, that Cale did a video about the Watchmen, which brought up this conversation, and I've got a link to his channel in the description, so definitely check that out. But yeah, did you want to talk a little bit about the 2 new trailers?
Well,
Shazam
I'll do third. Yeah. So a lot of the trailers dropped, and kind of funny. My childhood. Now, a lot of people either grew up on Star Wars or Batman or Star Trek or whatever. I grew up on Godzilla, and for once, I think an American Godzilla gets it. For once, I think they got it right this time with the new Godzilla movie that they showcased. I think they get it. I think this is the one.
Were you not a fan of 2014 Godzilla?
When it came to actual Godzilla stuff, I think he got it right, but I think he wanted to play it up as a classic Jaws / 1954 Godzilla movie, where there's a lot more emphasis on characters and what's happening around them, as well as the monsters. The problem is none of those characters were good, aside from Bryan Cranston, who's gone in like 15 minutes. And, you know, no, like Kick-Ass is like the most bland character in that. Like he has no personality. The Olsen, what's her, Ashley Olsen, is that her name? No.
I don't remember.
It's she's the
Elizabeth
Olsen. The only one who doesn't look like a mutant. She, like, even though she acted well, like, you know, I didn't really, you didn't really connect with her. And then you have the son, who they're kind of slightly hinting that maybe he's on the spectrum or something. Like there wasn't any like real depth to the characters, and I didn't really care about them. So when they were there and you're like spending all this time with them, you know, I wasn't really entertained by them. Like I'm all for like the Jaws effect, and that's fine. And to be fair, in all the old Godzilla movies, Godzilla is there and then he's gone for a long period of time. And when people said that they would pull away from like fights and stuff, they did that a lot in like the old Japanese Godzilla films, where we would have like a very short fight like in the middle of the film and then have like a big long one at the end. So a lot of what they did is true. It is true to form. I guess, but they did it a little bit too often, where they would give you a build-up that it looked like they were about to fight, and then it just didn't happen. Whereas in the films, they just showed the character. In the old films, they just showed the characters, and then that was it. Whereas this one, they actually gave you this build-up, build-up, build-up. Like, it was like, I don't want to get too graphic, but it was like a sex act was just about to happen, and then she says, I'm on my period, or like something like that, where it's like it just kills the vibe, and you're like,
Yeah.
and they do that like 3 times, so that when they actually start fighting, it's not like it's like fucking finally, Jesus Christ, they're not pulling away this.
Yeah, and the 2014 one.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least they wrecked a lot of cities.
Well, that's I think it's so funny because the Kong movie that they released, I disliked that one way more because it was almost like they saw the criticism that they're like, oh, not enough Godzilla, not enough action, too dark, too serious, and made the Kong movie like a total B movie, like where it had like it was not serious at all. You had a lot of Kong immediately. But the last 30 minutes of the 2014 Godzilla movie are phenomenal. Like everything in that film, everything in that last 30 minutes was just perfect. Like the sound design, the music, I wish his breath was a little bit more impactful. Like it did seem a little bit weak. And I wish they would have.
How so? It killed the hell out of that monster.
Well, I mean, it knocked him back, but he didn't actually do a lot of damage with it. He killed the
when he blows it into his mouth.
That's true. I guess maybe the initial time it shows up, and Gareth Edwards has talked at length how much he went back and forth between making the original like fire breath sound or like adding some or making a new sound. And I see where he's coming from because I loved the sound design in that movie, but it was purposefully like muffled to like kind of make the animals like have just that much more weight to them. So I can understand like if like there's these loud kind of muffled like crunching and booming sounds, and then you have like this cartoonish like sound of like the fire breath. I can understand that being it's just a little nitpick, but yeah, everything about that final 30 minutes was great. And so when this next Godzilla movie was coming out, I was worried that after Kong, they were just going to make it like more silly and more B movie. And when they said that it was pretty much a spiritual remake of the Godzilla film, Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, which had Rodan, which had Mothra, which had Ghidorah, and had Godzilla. That movie's silly. Like it's fine for what it is, but there's like a sequence of like the 3 monsters after fighting each other pretty much have like a political debate, and it is hilariously retarded. Yeah, like they
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, they like
they should have had the debate first and then fought.
Well, that was like, and for whatever reason, this woman is able to decipher what they're talking about. Like Godzilla is literally sitting, and Rodan is like, "Fuck you!" Like my wife was killed, and then like Mothra's like, "Shut up!" like Mothra's like the mediator, and Mothra's like, you killed
That's
my mom
awesome.
too. So, and like this woman is just giving you like a play-by-play of what's going on of this conversation, and then initially they like don't come to terms.
This is the best. This sounds like the best movie ever. What's it called again?
The Ghidra, the three-headed monster. Like all those, like,
oh man,
I'm waiting for like a Godzilla box set to come out.
I'm watching
Blu-ray.
it tonight. I can't wait. That sounds great.
Yeah,
Mothra is one of my favorites.
Oh, which one? Mothra?
Mothra. Yeah, I saw the first one with Mothra and the little girls that are imprisoned or whatever, and they sing and summon Mothra, and she wrecks the city. Godzilla has to come and fight her. Good stuff.
Yeah. So I was worried. Now, I mean, I was like, okay, so what are they going to do about this? Like, are they just going to just totally just forget the atmosphere of the 2014 one and go the more silly route with Kong? Like, is it just going to be like, is Kong just going to be like kind of like a Last Jedi thing where it's kind of tonally just completely different from the rest of like what they're trying to do? Like it's like I was worried to see how they were going to like make everybody happy. And if the trailer is anything to go by, I think they got it, because it doesn't appear to be as like super vague and Jawsy as the 2014 one. It seems like there's plenty of kaiju stuff, but the atmosphere is still there. Is really there. Like when you see like Mothra's like first showing of the wings, and you have like, and Rodan looks to be like a force, and Godzilla, like he's still like a hero, a reluctant hero, but he like, and then like I love how they didn't show Ghidorah. I love how they're still making us wait, because Ghidorah is like, you know, the Godzilla villain, like his ultimate, like, you know, rival. And I'm glad that how they hid that from us. So I'm very excited.
I have an age-old question for you.
Yes.
It pertains to Godzilla.
Of course.
Who would win in a fight between Godzilla and Superman?
Well, you can't.
Got to think about that one.
Well, the whole point of Superman is that he doesn't have a limit. There's no limit to his power. Godzilla.
Well, there's a finite amount of power that Superman has. I mean, he can only absorb. It's based on how much solar energy he's absorbed, right? That's how I look at it anyway. It's like a battery that can run out.
Mm-hmm. So,
in my opinion, I don't know.
I guess my counter, or kind of try it's because Godzilla is also based on radiation. That's why he needs to constantly be in, like, that's why he attacks cities, so that he can find radiation.
This is what it always, right? That's what it comes down to, really, is what kind of radiation does Godzilla emit? Does it hurt Superman or not? You know, because like the red sun radiation obviously hurts him.
Mm-hmm. So
I don't know.
Yeah, I would kind of, in my eyes, I would say Superman would win, strictly because Godzilla has shown to be susceptible to, like, he's very slow, and he can be exploited from a speed perspective. And now I think the real question would be, it's shown that if Godzilla is defeated in certain films, that he could destroy, his energy that he emits is so powerful that upon death he could melt and destroy the entirety of the world. So it's almost like, at what point, like, would Superman's morality, or would his like what would he do in that situation? Like that is, it is a very interesting.
Probably,
Now, if Godzilla had
yeah,
absorbed some Krypton energy, he would whoop that ass like all over. Like that would be
yeah.
a
That's the
beat
thing
down.
too. I'm not sure how his powers would hurt.
Mhm.
Even just Godzilla's regular powers might have some effect. I
I
don't
mean,
know. It's kind of interesting. I guess maybe.
if he was fighting the latest Godzilla that Japan made, Shin Godzilla, I think Shin Godzilla would light his ass up, because Shin Godzilla
That thing's
is,
evil.
yeah, that thing is just pure evil and energy. And it sucks that, we're not going to get a resolution to how that ended now. But like, I feel like power for power, even though I had my own problems with that film, I feel like that was the scariest version of Godzilla that they ever made.
Well,
Like that was
that's what they were going for.
right. But yeah, no, the trailer for the Godzilla film, I feel like they got it. I feel like it's going to be great. And I can't wait for it. Like I have not been that excited for like a movie. Like I've watched trailers, many trailers, many new trailers, and I've been like, oh, okay, all right, that looks fun. This I wanted to work out and then immediately masturbate. Like it is like a empowering little trailer.
Oh, that's a big endorsement. Does that probably come out next year?
Yes. Next, here's the thing though. It is coming out like I think within a month of the fourth Avengers film, and another
Ooh,
big release. So
rip.
it's they literally had nowhere else to
R.I.P.
put it. Yeah.
Rest in peace.
Now I know the other two
Everyone's
trailers.
just gonna watch Avengers 4 like 13 times in a row.
Hey, I will happily be that hipster in the Godzilla theater.
That's pretty bad if Godzilla is a hipster draw, but if it's up against Avengers, it pretty much might as well
Yeah.
be. Just put it at the indie art house theater.
Oh God. I actually saw the original Godzilla movie in an Alamo Draft House, and there was like this guy who smelled like cigarettes that sat next to me, and like my friend was not
Nice.
kind.
Well,
Yeah,
that's just to give you the sense of Tokyo's aftermath when it was all burned down. That smell is what they had to endure.
isn't Godzilla in
No?
sense of right alliance? That
Let's see.
cheap
There's
toy.
Shrek. There's Spider-Man. There's Superman. There's a car. I don't think there's Godzilla.
Ah, I thought he was
I think you're
in.
thinking of Shrek. No,
I know
Shrek is
Shrek
in it.
was in it,
The sense of
but I
yeah,
think
the sense
Godzilla.
of right alliance.
I think in one version of it, I do
There
think
might be
Godzilla.
different. there's probably there's probably different versions of it.
Yeah, but
Why would Godzilla be in it though? Of all people,
yeah,
the best is when it's just a random car. There's like a car in there. It's like what? It's not even like from Cars, the movie. It's just a car. It's like
there's
okay,
like this. There's this
had this.
great like, uh, God. There's this great Batman. God. Secondhand like Chinese thrift shop that my friend and I went to, and he's not like he's not my Facebook friend anymore, but he took like a picture of the box, and it was like he became like he witnessed the death of his parents, and he became Spider-Man, but Spider-Man wasn't his true calling, and he became the Batman. And he like it is like there should be like a Tumblr or like a YouTuber who goes around to these thrift shops and finds these random fucking toy like knockoff superhero toys, because they have like these convoluted backstories. All of them do. And it is wonderful. But
That's awesome. Yeah, that would be a cool hobby. So,
Yeah.
did you check out the Aquaman trailer?
Yes, I did. I did check out that one, and I checked out Shazam. Now, here's the funny thing, though, or it might not be funny. It's whatever. But I personally um, couldn't. I don't remember a lot of the Aquaman one. I'd have to rewatch it again because I remember it being. I remember
Yeah.
being fine with it, but I also remember that it didn't really make much of an impression on me. Like it was just kind of, oh, that looked all right.
It looked very polished, but it was also a little generic, perhaps.
Yes. Um,
Okay.
and
I liked it. I did watch it a few times, though.
mhm. um,
But there's
I,
definitely a lot of cliche.
yeah, I much after watching Shazam, like I was much more like I got much more of a lasting effect of that one than I had with Aquaman because it was a fresh idea. It was fresh. Like Shazam was just very fresh. Like it looked like something that hadn't been done before. It hadn't been something that I had
Yeah.
seen many times. And honestly, like, is it part of the universe or is it separate or is it like what is that?
Well, here's the thing. They had a Superman and a Batman reference in the trailer.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think so. I mean, it doesn't feel like it's in the DCEU, but I mean, it's got to be, right?
Yeah.
At the very least, it exists in a universe that has Batman and Superman. So I think it does. We saw the Batarang, and then we saw the
Right. Yeah,
newspaper that
that's
has
true.
Superman.
So,
So I think
um,
that was a little hint that it's in the same universe.
and it's kind of like I saw the new Ant-Man film on Friday, I believe, either Thursday or Friday, and it's kind of funny because I had completely forgot about I completely forgotten about the movie. Like the next day, I saw it, and it's kind of like if the DC universe had gotten like maybe as more successful than they thought, and it had it was well we were in the throngs of that whole DC versus Marvel thing. Like would this movie had much had as much of a surprising aura of quality to it, or would it had been more of a film that was lost in the shuffle? Like at if Justice League and all those other movies had performed much better than what they were supposed to, and they were making way more of these movies, would Shazam still be as special looking as it is, or would it have been a movie that would essentially be lost in the shuffle?
Well, there's always the potential it could be. Um, there was a lot of really successful Marvel movies after Avengers.
Right. Well, that's what I'm
So,
saying. Like Ant-Man, the latest Ant-Man movie, I feel like
it
it's
could
just
go.
lost in the shuffle. I think because they have spaced the movies out
Well,
a little bit more with DC, like that's why
yeah, there's a
Shazam feels
few
special.
problems. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could really go either way. Would the quality make people interested in the DC movies, or because that's the other thing. Ton of people were like, "No, I'm done. I'm not going to watch any DC movies." But yeah, but this trailer was so good. I've heard quite a few people come back to it. And of the two, man, Shazam was definitely my
Oh,
preference. Like,
oh yeah.
that's going to be hilarious. I love it. It's so cool to just have like a light-hearted, fun comedy movie that families can enjoy. Probably bring in young audiences, get young readers into comic books, which is a whole other issue we talk about all the time on
Mhm.
YouTube. Is the print comic book industry is like collapsed basically. It's a niche industry. A lot of people are in denial about that, and I think movies like Shazam, it's not a direct translation into the comic book readership, but even if it pulls a few young readers in, like anything helps. Like it's a good course correction for DC in a lot of ways, I think.
Well, do you think? And I've actually been I've actually thought about this a lot. And one of the reasons why I've been thinking about this is I actually, when I went to Denver, I bought some Star Wars comics, and I'm actually digging what Marvel's been doing with Star Wars from a comic book perspective, way more than the current films are. And it
Yeah.
made and I
Well, it
remember
depends because they do have a Last Jedi comic running as well. But I know what you mean. The main series.
right. And I remember growing up,
Uh-huh.
there were specific Star Wars comics that I actually loved. Like there was like a Boba Fett one, there was a Darth Maul comics short series that was really good. And it made me wonder, is the success of these superhero movies hurting that industry? Because it seems, in an attempt to be different than these movies, Marvel made all these crazy changes to, the way these characters look, and to and like that, like Thor is a woman, all this stuff. I don't really think it's necessarily political so much as it is. It seems like they're desperately trying to like create something that's not the movies, like give it its own flair. And it's not. I don't. And it just
Yeah.
seems like nobody's connecting with it.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's people. We've been talking about that for a couple of years. Really, it's like, why is it when you go to a theater you see all these characters, but when you go to the comic book shop they're totally not them? That's definitely a contributing factor to the low sales. And just from a marketing standpoint, it's really silly. I can't imagine being a vendor selling comics and someone comes in and they're like, "Oh, well, we just saw the Avengers. My boy and girl loved it. Let me get a Black Widow comic and an Iron Man comic." And then the store clerk then has to explain
Wayne.
why they can't do that. And then after 10 minutes of that crap, the guy just leaves and they never buy a comic book. So it's like, come on. That, or they have to sell them back issues and try and explain why a comic from 10 years ago is more like the movie they just saw. So
Well, that's
it's
why
a
I
huge
think
problem, no doubt.
it seems to me like, with everything like digital, it seems to be. I mean, there's nothing that beats that collector's mindset if you're an avid collector of comic books. But at the same time, it seems as an industry, and with certain, like, it seems like, kind of like with YouTube, like if you have a pen and paper or a tablet, like there's a bazillion shitty web comics, like that range from all different kinds of things. So the means in which to consume um, comics in general, it seems it's going in a much more digital route. And I guess,
That's the thing, though. The sales on digital comics actually plateaued around 2014, and they haven't been picking up enough to fill in the lost sales in print comics. So we're kind of in a weird limbo right now where the overall comic industry is declining big time on the actual comic side, not the movie side.
Mhm.
And digital is supposed to be this magic bullet to step in and save it. But two things on that. First of all, it's really easy to pirate those. So a lot of people aren't buying them, that even the ones that are interested aren't buying them. And they also tend to not cost as much. And, finally, they aren't selling as much. The sales just aren't there to back it up. So I don't know what's going to happen. It's kind of a dark time for the industry.
Didn't what's his name? I think Jim Lee even started like freelancing again. Like he does like, I know he shows some work on YouTube, and he's starting to do like commissionary work, like his contract
I imagine he's
I mean, he's a
no.
multi-millionaire.
Well, no, he's in charge of, like, he took Jeff John's job. He's like the CCO now, Chief
Oh.
Creative Officer at DC.
Mhm.
But he definitely does commissions and stuff too. Basically, any of these artists that are top tier will, unless they or under contract not to, but that's like how they make their real money. I mean, Jim Lee would get paid big bucks, but a lot of these artists aren't getting very much on their page rate, so you got to be a pretty mean publisher to be like, nah, you can't do commissions. But yeah, Jim Lee, man, I bet he can make a couple grand on just, one of his character drawings.
Is he like at this point just widely regarded as like the best comic book artist of like all time?
No, not by any means. I mean, he's one of the best for sure, but
or the most popular, I guess I should say.
Boy, I don't know. Maybe. I think he probably actually peaked a while back.
Yeah, it was kind of funny.
He's a big one.
I think actually, now this is just me from my own standpoint. I think like his best actual drawn work. Now I have my own problems with the comic as a whole, but I feel like that's one of the things I say. Like, even though I have my own issues, I feel like Hush was like one of his best like works from a pure like art standpoint.
Yeah, that's an amazing book. Hush is definitely one of the most popular ones. Hey, did you see they're going to do an animated movie of it?
After The Killing Joke, I can't hold my breath for these things anymore.
Did you watch the Death of Superman? Was a lot better animated than The Killing Joke movie.
Yeah,
I think anyway. Like, Killing Joke was, from an animation standpoint, probably the low point, I think, for the DC movies, at least in the past 10 years.
I actually really enjoyed the Dark Knight Returns animated movies.
Yeah.
I feel like the battle between him and Superman got a little bit too Dragon Ball Z like, but aside from that, I really liked it.
Their power level.
Yeah, when Batman started beating him with like pieces of concrete, like those two like big concrete things, I was like, yeah, this is a little much here. And then yeah, I'll have to take a look at that. Because I wonder how they'll interpret Jim Lee's art style into like a fully realized like animated feature. They've made some shit though. Like I feel like
they kind of have already, because he did the Justice League Origins comic book. He did all the art on that, and that was Justice League War. The adaptation of that was Jim Lee art that was adapted into an animated movie.
Let me see. I mean, I'll take a look, but yeah, I'm curious to see how that, because it's funny.
The art doesn't look like. Art in the movie doesn't look like Jim Lee's style.
No,
so I don't think they'll try.
Yeah, so I would be interested to see how they. I mean, because that story is so. I mean, it's kind of like that's going to be a tough one because I really liked the art. I really loved the art. Like I loved how they did Metropolis. I love how they did, like the Joker. Like just was insane looking in that one. I really like the Catwoman design. I mean, they've used pretty much that Catwoman design for like any form of like video game or popular media. Like that look of Catwoman pretty much became like the universal look for her afterwards.
Yeah, and I do like the Catwoman when she wears all purple, like in The Long Halloween and some of the other stuff.
Yeah, I guess
that can actually work for her, I think.
Yeah, it's so weird. I mean, I'm going off on a tangent here because like the three books, actually the four. I have pretty much the four most mainstream like Batman comics. I have The Long Halloween. I have Killing Joke. I have Hush, and I'm just talking about recently, I guess. And Year one. And I actually
you gotta have Year One. That's a good one.
Actually,
I'm not even a huge Frank Miller guy, but
mhm.
I love Year One. I think it's great.
That's actually one I would like to see them update the art and make, like, if Jim Lee did like a cover, or like somebody like him did a modernized version of the art in Year One. I would love to see that, because that's the, I mean, I know why they made the art kind of the way it was, sort of like in the Watchmen. Like, it was all about kind of a throwback, but you know, there's certain sequences in that I would love to see drawn in a
Well,
modern style.
did you watch the animated Batman
Yeah,
Year One?
yeah, I did. It was good. I had a. It was funny because I watched that and Under the Red Hood like back to back. So like I got to see like really good and then really shit. Like, did you ever see that Under the Red Hood?
Yeah,
Like,
most people really like it.
really?
Yeah, it's not one of my favorites, but it's always rated in the top. Like, when you look at the DC animated movies, like Flashpoint's pretty much always the first one, and Under the Red Hood will be in the top 10 for sure. I've seen a lot of people's personal lists put it at number one.
I really thought they miscast like everybody. Like, I didn't necessarily like a lot of the voice work. Felt some of the animation looked kind of cheap. Um, like it just, like, because it was funny because I had read like early stuff seemed to be really positive on it, but then when I watched it, I was like, really? Like, it's not hitting the same notes for me. Whereas Year One, like, I really was into like that. I really liked. So I don't know how we got
Yeah, Year One's one of the best. Oh, that's just the way live streams are. That's why I don't worry about it too much. But you have a topic just to start with, and then it goes off the rails. Pretty
um,
much always.
yeah, but I mean, it seemed like we went kind of like, you know, I mean, it all kind of relates to the Watchmen in a way, because the Watchmen was kind of this amalgamation of merging like pop culture and parody with in the genre, and after that, like, you had like more of these meta uh, mixtures of pop culture and comics, like, kind of fusing, and now you're kind of seeing the culmination of it all together with what's happening now. Like, the movie industry has revitalized but also destroyed the industry from which it came from, and that there's
Yeah,
like a
it's
strange,
all. It's a cycle.
yeah. So, and it's funny, like, as I do my like creative stuff, like, and as I like I finally got back into drawing. I'm drawing my personal comic again, and it's weird
Oh,
because,
you
like,
working on that again?
yeah, I took a hiatus of it because I was so hyper focused on it, and then I got burned out a little bit, and then like my program was acting up, and I had to like update it, and I had kind of like a free cracked version of the one I was using, but then like when my MacBook updated, it now like knows how to track that shit, so I actually got to get like a legitimate version of it. But I'm actually glad I did, because there's so many more assets I could use and take advantage of. Um, but it's
Well, that's
weird
good.
because also the web comic scene is so it's it is a weird world. It is um like, it's almost like people are pressured into making simple like slice of life comics, or like homoerotic boy love comics, which is so weird. Like, and it,
Sounds weird.
well, it's weird because that the reason why people are pressured into doing those is because the primary readers of those are like pubescent girls, because they feel more comfortable reading that kind of romance, because it's not something that can be like directly related to them, yet it has similar beats of like a prepubescent like story arc. Because like I submitted a few of my pages of my story, and they got to the dynamic of the mentor character in my story, and there a lot of the comments were like, "Yo, they should be together, not him and the girl." And so I like immediately deleted everything. So
Yeah, I've definitely seen it's like a subculture, the yaoi stuff.
yeah, that's what I'm going. That's where I was going for it, and I was like, damn
Yeah,
it. Um,
yeah, that's a thing for sure.
it's
I don't
it's
know. Webcomics are kind of like anything goes because anyone can make their own thing.
and that's why one of my
Like it's
favorite
real.
websites. One of my favorite websites is the Bad Webcomic Wiki. Like that is, oh, you see some shit. It is, and I feel like
What
I'm
what
sorry.
has been seen cannot be unseen.
Oh yeah, no, there is
What? Yeah.
there is like there's like this one comic about this fat panda girl that's like it's a fetish thing about eating, and it initially starts as her just like as a simple like slice of life fetish comic where she's just eating stuff, and then it like slowly transforms into like this action packed Men in Black style thriller, but she's still like it still has the fetish of her eating. So there's like action
So
sequences,
so weird.
but it's I feel like that there's a bit of like meta in the like the creativeness of both the wild west of both video production on sites like YouTube and web comic creativity, like in the vein of a Taptastic or a Smack Jeeves, like comic hosting, where you can tell that there are certain clicks and certain audiences, and but there isn't like they haven't optimized these uh they haven't optimized their kind of like search engine to like find where quality is, or have like these people that can sift through the shit to find quality and be the judger of like, okay, we think this is good, this is what you're going to show. And there's still like these weird hierarchies where in like websites comic like these comic hosting things, like if you made something really good in like 2005 or 2008 and you come out with something new, we're going to push you to the top even if it's the shittiest shit we've ever read. You'll get us attention, so we're going to promote you. Or if on YouTube, like you see like the things that usually trend the most are like television skits, or people like makeup artists that are
Yeah,
popular already. Like
that's what's
it's
so aggravating.
so they
It's
haven't
like
really.
TV. The whole
Yeah,
reason
well,
we
I got
have YouTube is because it's not
right.
TV, and then they promote all this crap that's just like Saturday Night Live skit or like Conan
Mhm.
O'Brien or something, and it's got like 50 million views. I'm like, okay, YouTube, maybe promote actual content creators.
Well,
You
they
know,
used to.
nobody's watching. Nobody's watching TBS, like
Mhm.
a top-rated TV show. If it got like 7 to 10 million viewers, they would freak the hell out. But then a YouTube channel, will have 50 million views, and it's not even hot shit.
Mhm.
So I don't know. They need to stop propping up TV.
Or at least
Just let it
create
die.
like these subgenres, like I think they're trying to capitalize on this YouTube TV thing um a little bit, and that's why they're trying to like showcase television, because they're like, hey, our website can bring you guys attention, and they're so that they can like sign them potentially. And then
Oh,
whereas you and they are getting better. Like I do agree with them. uh it's a right step to be like, okay, you have to reach certain thresholds before you're a partner. Now they should have never did the partnership for anyone program anyway, because I feel like in the long run, like they kind of just saw like the dollar signs and didn't realize that if anyone's a partnership, that's why all like that shit happened, because people were making racist, homophobic like videos and getting ads and stuff, and I feel like initially they had a quality threshold where public opinion was key, and they saw like what people were actually thinking was good content, and that's what got pushed to like partnership, and they're kind of now like, okay, let's take a step back and let's reevaluate and everything. And I think just in general, that whole like digital promotion kind of game, self-promotion thing, it's so young. Like it's so young and kind of infantile at this stage. But I do believe going forward, as regular jobs or just life in general becomes more automated, and it's kind of like the people who are creatives are left to their own devices, are left to their own responsibilities to promote themselves or create, be self efficient, as these other jobs like corporate jobs probably dry out. Like you're going to see these more options than just throwing your shit on YouTube or throwing your shit on these just streamlined webcomic hosting services, and you're going to see you're going to see way more options and way more people investing into like other options. And I think like that's like
right.
I mean, I can see that happening. It's right now. It's just shifting into the shit. But it seems like, are you gonna play some Age?
Huh? Oh yeah. Do you want to play some Age of Empires? I was thinking of wrapping this up.
Yeah.
We got Josiah. At least.
I don't know. I'm a little tired. It's kind of funny because I came from somebody else's stream to this one, so I think I'm kind of voiced out. Yeah, it was like this weird guy. I wonder if he'll never see this, but it was a streamer who, like, I just wanted to have something on in the background as I was doing my graphic comic, and it was like some guy playing, or actually I think it was a trans person, and they were playing Mario Tennis, and I was just watching them play Mario Tennis, and I'm like, and then he stopped, and then he just was not doing anything, and I was like, why did this show up? And he like wanted me to get on his Discord and talk to him. Ended up talking to him for like an hour and a half, and then I looked him up online. I'm like, holy shit! And I'm like, oh god, I hope this isn't on like a locale site or something. So, see what happens there.
That's funny. Well, you never know with the internet.
No, you never do. So,
but
anyway,
thanks for coming on. It was awesome. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. It was
2.5.
2.5.
But if you want to come on again sometime, or this next Sunday on the 29th, I'm going to do a live stream with a whole bunch of people, hopefully, and we're going to be talking about our favorite graphic novels.
Oh, that sounds good to me. I would actually very much like to be part of that.
Sweet. So I'll talk to you more about that before then, but that's all for now. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Later.